All right, I'll call this meeting of the Plan Commission to order. If we could have a roll call when you're ready.
Mr. Ackerson,
Here.
Ms. Billman,
Here.
Mr. Bell, Mr. Fitch,
Here.
Mr. Hopkins, Ms. Wadrago,
Here.
Mr. Turner,
Here.
Mr. Weisskopf, Ms. Yu.
Here.
We do have a quorum. Are there any changes to the agenda? Apparently not. The minutes from the previous meeting, we have here the minutes of the September 6, 2018 Plan Commission meeting. Any motions on the minutes?
Move to approve.
Motion by Mr. Turner, second by Mr. Ackerson. Any changes to the minutes? We'll do this by voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Communications. We have a communication from the Urbana Park District, Tim Bartlett, the Executive Director, and it doesn't reference a specific case, but I do believe he's mainly talking about the second two cases that we'll be considering tonight, which border onto Leo Park, where the Park District's one of their offices is. And essentially, this, I wouldn't say this downright opposition, but certainly it raises a bunch of concerns about a change in zoning to B3 to B4, changes in land use, safety for traffic. They've built a bike path through there that they hope one day to connect to downtown to Crystal Lake Park and then out to the new trail that goes, the Kickapoo Trail. General increases in light, removal of trees, personal safety, additional noise, additional parking, drainage, worried about screening and fencing, impacts to the historic cottage they've got there, garbage collection, smells, signage impacts, character of the whatever gets developed there, if it conflicts with their historic facilities, parks, and trees. And I think those are the main highlights. So wanted to enter this into the record. Do we have any continued public hearings? We don't. We don't have any old business. We do have a new public hearing. So I will open planned case number 2352 M18, request by Jonah Weisskopf to rezone a 1.16 acre parcel located at 206 South Cedar Street from R6 high-density multiple family to B4 Central Business Zoning District. Mr. Ricci.
Good evening, members of the Plan Commission. I would like to introduce our new Planner 1, Lily Wilcock. Stand up, Lily. This is her first week, and she's come to some good ZBA meetings, and now she's going to have a fabulous Plan Commission meeting. So, go Lily. So the case before you is a request by Jonah Weisskopf to rezone 206 South Cedar in downtown Urbana from R6 high-density multiple family residential to B4 central business, which would reflect the future land use designation of central business attributed to the parcel in the 2005 comprehensive plan. I would like to point out that the memo incorrectly identified the subject property as 406 North Lake in the summary of findings. It is actually really 206 South Cedar Street. Thank you for your diligence and your close reading. Keeps me on my toes. So as you look at Exhibit A, the property is located on the east side of Cedar Street between West Elm and West Green Streets and contains one 2-story, 3-unit apartment building on a 6,900 square foot lot. And here you have a lovely satellite rendering available from Google that is looking east across Cedar Street at the property, which is currently zoned B6. It was rezoned from R4, also high-density, multiple-family residential back in 1970. So it's been this zoning classification for decades. Land to the north, east, and south are zoned B4, as you can see from Exhibit B, and are the sites of the Urbana Free Library and Bluebird Boutique to the east and south. Land to the west is zoned mixed office residential here to the west, and uses include lawyers' offices, yoga studios and spas, apartment buildings, and houses of worship. Looking at Exhibit C, the 2005 comprehensive plan, the proposed rezoning would expand this very large central business future use designation to complete the block and bring the subject property zoning into conformity with its future land use designation. So, looking at the LaSalle criteria and the Sinclair criteria, the LaSalle National Bank case resulted in the Illinois Supreme Court developing a list of 6 factors that are paramount in evaluating the legal validity of a zoning reclassification. The court also developed 2 more factors in the Sinclair Pipeline versus Village of Richton Park case. These 8 criteria should be the basis of the Plan Commission's recommendation to City Council regarding the requested rezoning of the property. First, the proposed rezoning to B4 is compatible with the zoning and land uses of the immediate area, as was shown in Exhibits A and B. The zoning and uses of the area are listed in the memo. Second, the proposed rezoning to B4 is the initial step in pursuing an adaptive reuse of existing historic structures, as stated in the application, increasing the subject property's potential use while maintaining the structure's current integrity. This additional commercial site would serve to further stabilize the area and increase synergy between the existing neighboring uses. All of these interactions would be beneficial for those neighboring businesses, resulting in a potential increase in property value. Third, regarding promoting the health, safety, welfare, and morals of the public, the proposed rezoning to B4 central business would not affect the health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the public in any foreseeable way. Fourth, the public may see gain from the future potential business opportunities that could be incorporated into the building under the proposed B4 rezoning, while they would see no gain in keeping the site as simply a 3-unit apartment building. Conversely, the property owner would continue to experience potentially significant hardship from the reduced development potential that is allowed in the R6 zoning. Fifth, the subject property could be well suited for the proposed B4 uses by eliminating the current parking space requirements. This would allow for better use of the structure itself without having to sacrifice building footprint or open space for parking. Given the existing B4 zoning adjacent to the north, east, and south, the proposed B4 district reflects the central business land use designation that is shown in the 2005 comprehensive plan. Sixth, the higher and better use of the site through adaptive reuse as a result of the proposed rezoning to B4 increases the likelihood that the property will remain economically viable. Seventh, regarding the community's need for more of the proposed use. The uses allowed in the proposed B4 district are varied and would add to the diversity already present in downtown Urbana. The R6 zoning district currently allows only a total of 33 different uses, while the B4 district allows one of 129 different uses. So there's a lot more opportunity in that zoning district for reuse. And finally, regarding the care with which the community has planned its land use development. In 2005, the city adopted its comprehensive plan, and it designated this property within the area that was contemplated as appropriate for central business type land uses within the area. Public comment, as of today, staff received one public comment from Tom Bruno, which was in support of the proposed rezoning to B4 central business. The staff findings were summarized in the memo, but I will say that the proposed zoning map amendment is consistent with the 2005 comprehensive land use plan, and that the proposed zoning map amendment generally meets the LaSalle and Sinclair criteria. The Plan Commission has the following options for a recommendation to the City Council in Plan Case 2352M18, either to forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to approve the request as presented, or to forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to deny the request. Based on the evidence presented in our discussion today, staff recommends that the Plan Commission forward this case to City Council with a recommendation to approve the proposed rezoning. And that is the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Ricci. Any questions for Mr. Ricci? Ms. Billman?
Isn't there usually a third option, like somewhere in between approving and denying it?
Not
like
for,
a modification? What is this?
Not for a rezoning case.
Not for
There's-
rezoning,
It's
okay.
either,
okay.
now, right, yes, correct, no.
So in other words, we can't really put conditions on it or anything because the zoning ordinance specifies what can be done by right.
Right.
Any questions, Mr. Turner?
Do we know if there is an immediate plan for change for the property?
The application mentioned adaptive reuse, possible because the rezoning is a slate of potential uses. What was mentioned in the application was possibly a integrated coffee shop or a music venue.
Great. Any further questions? I just had a couple of questions. The size of the lot is not large.
Correct.
So I was looking at differences between B3 and B4. Looks like the whole rest of the block is B4. Just to clarify some of the differences there, because I think they may come up later as well. So my understanding is the main difference is, other than the parking, is really setbacks.
Correct. The setbacks, there are zero,
No setbacks in B4.
no setbacks in B4.
Modest setbacks in B3, but.
Correct.
Yeah. So essentially, we're talking about letting the owner use the whole lot.
Correct. As, in that entire large B4 district.
Right. And there's no height requirement. The floor area ratio is a little larger in B4 than B3. But given the size of that lot, I wouldn't think if they wanted to go up, they could go up very high. Do you have any kind of idea, given the floor area ratio of, I think it's 9 in B4, how high they could go?
No. No,
Yeah.
I mean,
Higher than 35 feet?
probably not, given the size of
That's,
the lot.
I was wondering about that.
Right. There is no.
Which would be
open-
residential, typically.
Pardon?
Typically, 35 feet, I think, yeah.
Yes, in most of the residential, even the higher density residential
Uh-huh.
lots until you get super high. It's possible, actually, that it could have a taller height allotment currently in the R6 than it would in the B4.
I was wondering about that, yeah. Okay, any further questions? Ms. Yu?
Yes. I have a question about one of the zoning map. Across street on Green Street side, there's some R6B zoning type. Can you explain that one? There's 3 properties with yellow with red dot.
Yes. Okay. The R6B
And
is
this-
not one that is very common in the city, so
Yeah,
I end up having to look it up.
essentially, I'm looking at the uses here. In R6B, you both have pretty similar residential uses that are allowed, but R6B allows a lot more business uses. So you could have, in those two properties, as it's currently zoned, they could have a mix of residential and business uses, whereas in R6, it's pretty much just residential.
And it's simply called the R6 High Density Multiple Family Restricted. So there are fewer uses that are permitted in that district, but it's primarily high-density multifamily residential.
Further questions?
Well, here, let me, I actually have a zoning, so the zoning description, it's still 6,000 feet minimum lot size, and primarily residential. There's planned use development allowed. There are a few conditional uses allowed.
Okay, so I guess there are some commercial use allowed under R6B, but B4 will make it a lot more available than R6B.
Right, and it would essentially take out future residential uses. So this residential use would be allowed to continue as a non-conforming use, but if it stopped, if it was abandoned in the future, if it was rezoned to B4, residential use would not be allowed to be reestablished. If it was, say, rezoned to R6B rather than B4, that residential use could continue, nonstop into the future, be abandoned, and then restart up again. And since the comprehensive plan designated this area for central business use rather than high-density multifamily residential, that's where the request comes in for the rezoning to a business designation rather than a different residential.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Oh, Mr. Turner?
I was just looking at the memo, and just to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, so B4, it does still have residential, right?
I believe so.
Residential can be permitted, that's right. You're right.
So it can still,
But it's particular kinds of residential. I'd have to look at the list
they
to
could
see
still
if they're
do
the same.
dwelling multifamily, dwelling multiple,
Yeah,
so they could continue that even if they stopped with the residential currently, right?
I believe you are correct, but let me,
I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. It just really expands what could potentially be there.
mhm.
okay, so the R6 and the B4. So, bed and breakfast in community living facilities and multifamily use could continue to be permitted in the B4. But if it were abandoned, so currently, right now, it's a triplex, and that would be considered the multifamily. If it wanted to be, say, converted to a single family,
Then
that
it
could
would
not happen, which could still happen in the R6, I believe.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yes, R6 does allow duplex dwelling as well as single family.
Any further questions? Ms. Billman?
Do you know if this property has ever been considered for historic status?
It is a local landmark, yes.
Does that have any impact on rezoning?
It would, not on the rezoning, no. No, it does put in some additional requirements if the property was wanted to be demolished. It's on our demolition delay list. So there would be some additional notification that would be done before it could be demolished.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Ricci. Now I'll briefly go over the procedures for public hearing. Anybody who wishes to, first of all, the petitioner may address the Plan Commission. Following that, anybody in favor of the application can address the commission. Following that, anyone opposed to the application can address the commission. At the end, the petitioner will be given a chance to have the final say, and then we'll close the public input portion of the hearing and discuss and possibly vote. So is the petitioner here, and do you wish to address the commission?
The petitioner is Jonah Weisskopf and cannot address the board.
Huh?
Jonah cannot.
Oh, because he
He is a
one
member
us.
of the
Okay.
board, correct.
That makes perfect
And
sense.
he did not designate a representative, so
Okay.
it stands on its own merits.
Okay, that's fair enough. Does anybody wish to speak in favor of the petition? Does anybody wish to speak not in favor of the petition? Okay, sir, you come up, please, and state your name and sign the register there.
I signed at the rear, is that correct?
Yeah, you can go ahead and sign this one, too. That one's just for attendance, and this
Okay,
one's for
okay.
actual the public record.
I am Alan Booth. I live at 302 West High Street, which is directly south of the property currently occupied by Tom Bruno's building, which is a multi-use office lower, residential above, and across from what used to be to the north of it, Weaver Henderson Funeral Home, which is now demolished and is an empty lot. The building immediately to the east of Bruno's building and to the north of the property in question here is the New Yorker. The New Yorker caused a lot of controversy when it was developed, and in fact, to this day stands in violation of the codes for the city as designated and specified by BOCA in Chicago, but they also put a rider on the end of their letter to the city of Urbana saying, in effect, it's still your code and you can do what you want with it, but it is a 4-story building in our eyes. And the end effect was that we now have a New Yorker that is a 3-story building on top of a basement that is higher above the ground than the actual ground level. And the setbacks on that building are in violation. They were not correctly measured off, and I caught it when it had already been started, and Mike Pollock, who was then alive and on the council and probably one of our finest members, had a long chat with me, and he said, Alan, technically you have the right to make them tear off the front of the building so it'll have the proper setback requirement. But he said the building would get pretty boring and maybe a little ugly if we did that. But you're right. Anytime a building is over a third the distance on the front is an outset, it becomes a new point of setback requirement. And so it violates that. It also violates property requirements on the east side, and there's a big argument with the neighbors, and we had a big hoopla. Out of all that, I'm very sensitive to the area, and I am especially sensitive to the fact that a number of years ago when all this was happening, we talked about getting B4 in there. You may note, if you know the area well, that the building to the west of Bruno's law office, which is a nice building, it really is a nice building, used to be Riley McCulley's dental office. And you'll also note that it climbs right out to the sidewalk. It got that status, and you're talking about getting this new property to come all the way out to the sidewalk. It got that status back in the 50s when Urbana had the notion that we would have a Parisian-style Champs-Élysées zone going to campus down Green Street, and that was all zoned so it could be intensive downtown business. And the only one who ever took advantage of it was Riley McCulley. And then he later sold it to Tom Bruno, and then Tom has owned that and his adjacent property on the corner. The neighborhood is very fragile. We have a delightful, quiet, hardly believable because it's so close to downtown, but we're still isolated. We have a lovely brick street down High Street where we can walk to farmers market. It's a great, I have the Knowlton and Bennett home. I am the second owner on it. It was built in 1900 and moved in Thanksgiving of 1900 by the Knowlton family, and a very active person in Urbana politics. Lum Corey eventually married the boss's daughter, and they ended up living. That has been in the same family until I bought it in '86. And they always said, be careful about keeping this neighborhood as low a zoning as possible. We're all kind of protective about it, because technically, the highest economic use of my house, if this thing goes B4, would be to sell it and make it into a parking lot or something like that. Also, the charm of my home, which is a beautiful, it's an arts and crafts Queen Anne, looking across the street at a business property that comes all the way to the front sidewalk, it totally changes the flavor of things. We've still got an amazingly charming little neighborhood there. That vacant lot has always begged to have something done with it, but we've been lucky. And I want very much not to see that go to before, in part because before Bruno bought the property, I was very, very active in checking out who was looking into buying it. We almost had a Wendy's hamburger stand put in there. And we got lucky, and Wendy's decided to go up to the corner of University and Race. But this is this whole professor's ghetto, which we kiddingly refer to it as, is a charmingly pleasant, special hideaway neighborhood. And my home will not have that charm if I have the possibility, potentially, of, I trust under B4, we could have a restaurant in there, we could have a tavern in there, we could have, am I correct? We could have a tavern right across. You have a wide variety of uses, you're correct. Am I correct? And would that include something like a well-done iron post? And the reason I ask is this: you'll find it maybe entertaining, but I don't want to take too much of your time because you have a 5-minute gag rule, and I've already gone past it.
I'm being a little liberal, but you can go ahead.
I know. When I bought the home from the Coreys, it was explained to me that the bedroom on the east side of the house was not the master bedroom, even though it was the biggest, because it wasn't the quietest, because on the drinking nights downtown Urbana, they filter back to campus by walking by our house noisily. And having a bar across the street or potentially a bar or restaurant type of thing would not be what I would want as a neighbor, and I am sure that many of my neighbors share that same sentiment, perhaps not as strongly as I do. Balber Kindra, was it the city engineer here years ago? He's from India. He owned property at the corner of Race and High and tried to get some zoning done on the block and failed, and I was thrilled to death. But this has kind of been a sleeping dog, and when I got the notice in the mail, I thought, I don't dare not mention, we don't want a B4 zoning there. It has perhaps in part been our good fortune thus far not to have anything inappropriate there, because the zoning is not, I like the term here, it becomes more economically viable with the B4, and when we talk about the adaptive reuse of existing properties, I love the phraseology. I love the English language, but as far as we are concerned, and I've been there 32 years, I don't want B4 across the street. And even though much of the area could be more business zoned than it is, it already is potentially that. We are lucky to have this benign little quiet neighborhood,
Right.
and I would hope, for someone to say we'd like to rezone it and we might put in some nice little thing that might not be offensive to anybody, that doesn't mean the next owner will feel that way. B4 can be lots of things.
That's correct, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, though. if you
I
would.
just wrapped up.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your testimony.
You have no questions?
Does anybody
at
have
all?
any questions?
I know the zoning in the area inside out, and I know the house, and I know the vested business interests, and people do care about that little neighborhood. It's a sweet neighborhood, and it's ripe for disappearing quickly with inappropriate zoning that is favorable to higher economically viability uses.
Yeah.
I don't want it there at all.
Okay, sir. Well, thank you very much. I don't think we have any questions. I appreciate it.
All right? I am correct that a bar could go in?
You are correct. A wide variety of retail uses, including
Is that a
tavern,
fair way of saying
tavern,
yes?
restaurant. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. That's what I will take back to the neighborhood, in part. I won't be unfair, but I mean...
Sure,
before
communicate the
it's
ordinance.
fraught with
Yeah.
possibilities.
That's correct.
And you're making a big decision when you say, try to sell it to the next owner if it's someone who really will do something nice with it and not ruin a neighborhood. A bar across the street would ruin a neighborhood.
All right,
And we're
thank you.
opening that possibility.
Thank you. Next. If you could state your name and sign the register, please.
I'd love to.
Thank you.
My name's Gina Peluso. I live here in the beautiful town of Urbana, right down the street, actually. I am, just so that I'm being transparent, I am on the Historic Preservation Commission here in town, but I'm not here speaking for the Historic Preservation Commission. This building is not a local landmark, as was mentioned. It is on the 100 most significant homes in Urbana list. And because of its age, and it depends on how it's zoned now, it may or may not be on a 45-day wait list if a demolition permit might come up against it. It depends on the zoning. And I'm not exactly sure. I researched this a while back, and I'm not exactly sure if B4 would then take it off of the 45-day demolition list or not. So that's something to think about and consider going forward. So really, I'm here because I don't want to say I'm against the zoning change, but I'm definitely against some of the things that could possibly go on this lot if it were rezoned B4. I know that the owner has talked about adaptive reuse, but there's nothing that binds the owner to adaptively reuse this building. It has been on this lot since 1930, but it has been on this block since the late 1800s. It used to be on Green Street, and they actually just shifted it over and moved the front of the house from Green Street to Cedar Street. So that's why your notes may say that it's pre-1900, but it's been there since 1930. I'm really concerned about the setback because, again, we don't know if this building will be adaptively reused. And if it's not, we could literally, as the previous speaker said, end up with something that's a zero lot line property. It could be a grocery store. It could be anything. So I think that based on what was said earlier, it sounds like you guys either have to approve or deny. Maybe middle of the road is to go with that, with the R6B, where some kind of a business would be allowed, but it could still be residential, and maybe that would actually lead to more of an adaptive reuse of the current property than rezoning it B4 would. Now, I think that also the library owns most of this lot, this block. The part that is not owned by the library is owned by the city. And I think this is the only other lot that's not owned by either of those entities. I would hate to see us lose, and I'm not trying to, I'm trying to be proactive here and make sure that we don't lose another gorgeous building in Urbana, something that's been here almost as long as the city itself. So I'm hoping maybe that we can find a middle of the road that would, consider the historic significance of this building, that neighborhood, but also allow the owner to get some additional use out of the building that might bring some more income, that might then in turn make that owner feel like it's worth keeping the building as is with some kind of an adaptive reuse. I think giving it a B4 designation just says, you know, well, okay, B4, you know, you say you're going to adaptively reuse it, but if we rezone it to that, financially, it makes it more feasible to knock that thing down. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your effort, and I appreciate you all being here. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Do you have any questions? Mr. Ackerson?
So what makes it, whether it's has a historic designation or not, other than it's been there a long time, is there anything else that makes it historic?
I haven't researched the building, but it is on the 100 most significant buildings list in Urbana, and I know before I was on the HPC, they went through that list extensively. There were hundreds of buildings on that list originally, and the HPC at that point went through and looked at and I wasn't on the HPC, but I was interested in historic preservation. I sat through that meeting, and it went till like 11 o'clock at night as they went through each nominee, and it was chosen at that point by the HPC, the Urbana HPC, to be one of the 100 most significant buildings. It has not been nominated to be a local landmark, but that doesn't mean it won't be in the future.
Any further questions? Any further questions? Nope. Oh, Ms. Billman?
Could it still be nominated if it was in B4?
I don't see why not.
As a building? Sure.
Okay.
Further questions?
Thanks again for your time.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
Anybody else wish to address the commission who's opposed to the proposal? And the petitioner doesn't have a representative, so we got no rebuttal. So that being the case, we will close the public input portion of this hearing and then begin discussion. Mr. Turner?
I just have a couple questions. So do we know do we know for sure this is not on the landmark status?
Correct, it is not on the landmark
Okay.
status. I'm looking at the survey for the property. It's eligible for National Register District, but it's not on that list, and it has not been locally landmarked.
Okay. And then as far as the other lots in that block, is this the only lot that's not owned by the city? Or, because even...
Or by the library.
Or the library, it
Yes.
is. So the city owns a lot directly to the south of this building
And to the north.
and to the north. Okay.
Yes.
Which is also B4.
The entire block is B4 other than this
except for
property.
this. Okay.
And as a matter of fact, several properties on this block were recently rezoned to B4 just this past summer.
I remember the case
right.
Ms. Yu?
Sorry.
Okay. Do you have a question?
No, I do remember the case south of this building being rezoned. What was the previous zoning destination before they changed to B4?
It actually looks like it might have been B1, neighborhood business.
Thanks.
Thank you. Did you have anything further, Mr. Turner? No.
Not at the moment.
Okay. Any further discussion?
No,
Mr. Ackerson?
just some thoughts is it's a tough one because I can appreciate the historic nature of the structure, but if I'm thinking in terms of plan and planned use, it really kind of sticks out as a sore thumb to be the only non-B4 on that lot, given what it's surrounded by. I'm very familiar with where it's located. I'm sensitive to the issue of the neighboring neighborhood, fond of the faculty ghetto aspect, but this is not in the faculty ghetto. It's adjacent to it. So it's a thorny one for me.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see that too. It makes logical sense to think about it as B4 and the surrounding and the future development plans and such there. We're not talking about the building being torn down, and it's hard to predict the future. We don't know what the plans might be. There isn't a definitive plan yet for it. So I agree with you. I agree with you.
I think that the purpose of B4 is to stimulate additional development in downtown. And so if this thing is, it might already be standing in the way of this whole block. I don't know, but it could be standing in the way of the whole block being, as was noted, torn down and become any of the uses that are in B3.
Sure.
B4, sorry. And it could be a very large structure with a variety of uses that would be compatible to downtown, not necessarily compatible to the neighborhoods that are near to this block.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that, to me, it's almost a classic kind of a buffer area where maybe some sort of transitional zoning starts to come into play. But I don't know where I was. When you rezoned it B4,
Mm-hmm.
I think I was in Wisconsin because I don't remember it.
I do remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Years ago, when the B4 was created, which was been within 10 years, I think, that's the purpose of it, is to allow for downtown-style development where with no setbacks, the buildings come to the sidewalks, and they're larger structures, multi-use from a commercial standpoint, a little bit of residential allowed. So that's the choice.
Do we know if the city has any plans for the lots that aren't owned by the library at this point?
That are owned?
That are not owned by the library already?
No,
The lot
I
to
do
the
not
south
know.
and,
The lot to the south is occupied by Bluebird Boutique,
Mm-hmm.
and the lots to the east are the library. The lot to the north is owned by the city, but I'm not sure if they have any plans for its future use. I think it's additional parking right now.
I suspect the city would want to redevelop it. Ms. Billman?
I would have more trouble with this if it were on the other side of Green Street. And as Mr. Ackerson said, this is adjacent to Professor Ghetto. It's not in it or even right next to High Street. And I love Professor Ghetto, actually. And I'm often confused about what to do when we want a pleasant, walking, pretty area as opposed to business. But I also feel like we have to balance it with, especially with the business needs of Urbana, especially downtown Urbana, which needs more businesses. And as far as the historic nature of it, I hate to see this building gone without a thought. And I would hope that the Historic Preservation Commission would get right on this and make it some kind of historic status, yeah. And I am going to vote for it, the rezoning, with the hopes that the Historic Preservation Commission does something.
Yeah, those designations are hard to obtain, frankly. I hear you. But,
Yeah.
yeah.
I will say, in a lot of communities that I've been at before, there have been really interesting and, yes, readaptive uses of some historic structures. And turning them into some really interesting coffee shops or some neat little restaurants that are fitting of the area and fit really well into kind of a neat culture. I don't know that Urbana has done a lot of that yet, from here and there, but not in, I think about Fort Collins, Colorado, for instance, and they have done that quite extensively, just right around Colorado State University campus. So it's really difficult because we can't predict what's going to happen. I could see all sorts of interesting things. I could see all sorts of other things that we wouldn't want there, necessarily, but we can't predict exactly what will happen.
Correct. Further discussion? Well, the comprehensive plan wants this to be a community business, which suggests a bit of a higher commercial zoning. B4 would be consistent. I think B3 would be consistent. I'm not so, maybe even neighborhood business, but that's where it was before. Neighborhood business would be friendlier to the neighborhood. Although I do agree that it's actually buffered a little bit by the Cedar Street and Green Street. And so I think my interpretation of the plan is that I need to support the plan and vote in favor. Although I understand the concerns. So, I don't know if anybody else has anything. Are we ready for a motion? Mr. Atkins?
Yes, I think you pretty much summarized my thoughts on this one. So I am going to make a motion that we approve the request for rezoning.
So you move,
For case number 2352-M-18, that we forward it to the city council with a recommendation to approve the proposed rezoning.
okay, motion by Mr. Ackerson, Ms. Billman, second by Ms. Billman. Any further discussion? Ms. Wedargo? No? Preparing to vote. Great. Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Billman?
Yes?
Mr. Fitch?
Yes.
Ms. Wadrago?
Yes.
Mr. Turner?
Yes.
Ms. Yu?
Yes.
And Mr. Ackerson?
Yes.
That motion passes. Do we have any date for the city council? Do we know?
November 5th, I think.
November 5th sounds correct. My apologies.
November 5th? Great. Thank you, Mr. Snyder. November 5th, City Council, and please, if so moved, go give them your testimony as well. Thank you. So that case is concluded. We'll now move to plan case number 2353 M18. I'm going to open it at the same time as plan case number 2355 M18. We will, after hearing testimony and discussion, if we choose to vote, when we choose to vote, we'll vote on them separately. But I think it makes sense to discuss them together. Mr. Ricci again.
Good evening. The case before you is two rezoning requests that came in close to each other but not simultaneously. I would like to make one correction that in the memo's introduction, Bridget Logue was incorrectly identified as Mary Logue, and it is indeed Bridget Logue as the owner of the property at 406 North Lake Street. And Mr. Fitch already did address the communication that we had received earlier this week from the Urbana Park District regarding the property. Requests were submitted by two neighboring property owners to rezone a total of 10 parcels from B3 General Business to B4 Central Business District. Exhibit A is left is facing north. University Avenue is on the left side of the exhibit, and these 9 parcels here along the frontages of Race and University are the Birch rezoning request. There are additional parcels along the back that are basically landlocked currently. This property here to the southwest of the Birch properties is the Logue property. Sarah Birch, trustee for the James Birch Trust, has requested rezoning for the 9 parcels at the southwest corner of University and Race, and Bridget Logue requested rezoning for the westerly adjacent parcel located at 406 North Lake Street. These changes would reflect the future land use designation of central business attributed to these parcels in the 2005 comprehensive plan. Exhibit B shows the current uses of the properties. The 9 Birch properties are all currently vacant. Some were last used as far back as 1973. Some most recently were used in 2017. So there is a range in the amount of times they've been vacant. 7 were used commercially, 2 were used for single-family residential. The Logue property at 406 North Lake Street down here is currently used as single-family residential. And so we have some Google Map renderings of the property. This is looking at southwest at the property across University Avenue. And the lower picture is looking west across Race Street into the property. The far side is Leo Park. The south side is the railroad, and the right side is University Avenue. And then some photographs. This is again looking at the property across Race Street, and the lower picture is looking at the northwest corner of the property at the corner of Race and University. A couple additional photographs. This is looking south across University Avenue. We have one of our lovely new VO rides, bike share bikes, and this is a picture of 406 North Lake Street, the currently occupied single-family residential property. All 10 properties have been zoned B3 general business since 1979. That's this red designation. Leo Park to the west is zoned conservation, recreation, education, and the properties to the south and east are currently zoned B4 central business. Exhibit D details the future land uses of the property. As we can see, everything south of University Avenue is designated as for future land use of central business. Leo Park continues to be designated for future park use, and properties north of University Avenue are designated for community business future use. The proposed rezoning would bring the subject property zoning into conformity with their future land use designation as per the comprehensive plan. This would expand the easterly adjacent B4 central business district further west to its western bounds of its designation in the comprehensive plan. And it would also provide a more appropriate zoning classification for an area that the 2012 Downtown Urbana Plan included as part of downtown. From a future development standpoint, the proposed B4 zoning designation requires a reduced minimum lot size, bringing the 4 currently legally non-conforming lots into compliance with the zoning ordinance. One additional correction, the B4 zoning district actually allows fewer uses than the B3 general business district does, not more. But the B4 district does eliminate the minimum parking requirement, providing more flexibility for future use. Since there were some questions in the last case, I didn't include this in the memo. The definition of the B3 general business district is intended to provide areas for a range of commercial uses wider than that of neighborhood business, but at a lower intensity than central business, meeting the general business needs of the city. The B4 Central Business District is intended to provide an area for the focus of the city in which the full range of commercial and business uses may locate in a limited area of high-intensity uses with the appropriate forms of physical development at high intensity. So those are the philosophical differences between the B3 and B4 districts. I won't reread to you the LaSalle criteria admonishments, but I will give you the highlights. The proposed rezoning is compatible with the zoning and land uses of the immediate area, as we can see from the zoning map. The zoning and uses of the area are listed in the memo. The proposed rezoning should not reduce the property values of neighboring properties. The primary differences between the B3 and B4 zoning districts are the decrease in allowed uses, but the reduction of several lot characteristics, such as required yard setbacks, floor-to-air ratio, etc. Increasing the flexibility of the subject properties for future use should not reduce the property values of the surrounding properties. Third, the proposed rezoning to B4 will not affect the health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the public in any foreseeable way. There is no discernible difference between the current B3 zoning and the proposed B4 zoning in this regard. Fourth, the public would experience limited gains in continued vacancy of the subject properties, as has been the case under the current B3 general business zoning for many years in the case of some of the subject properties. Conversely, the property owner would continue to experience significant hardship from the reduced flexibility and lot usage that is created by the B3 general business zoning. Fifth, the subject properties are well suited for central business type uses, which would be allowed under the proposed rezoning to B4. Given the existing B4 zoning adjacent to the east and nearby to the south, the proposed B4 district is logical and reflects the central business future land use designation shown in the 2005 comprehensive plan. Sixth, regarding vacancy of the properties. 6 of the 10 properties have been vacant an average of 15 years. One has been vacant over 30 years. As such, rezoning would likely encourage the vast majority of the subject property to be put to use rather than continue to sit vacant. Seventh, regarding the community's need for more of the proposed use. The uses allowed in the proposed B4 district are varied and would add to the diversity already present in downtown Urbana. Finally, regarding the care with which the community has planned its land use development, when the city adopted its comprehensive plan in 2005, the area of the subject properties, due to its proximity to downtown Urbana, was generally envisioned as part of the central business future land use designation, transitioning to regional business to the east and community business to the north and west. Public comment. As of today, city staff received one public comment from the director of the Urbana Park District, which expressed concerns regarding the proposed rezoning. The staff findings are summarized in the memo. Highlights are that the proposed zoning map amendments are consistent with the 2005 comprehensive plan, and that the proposed zoning map amendments generally meet the LaSalle and Sinclair criteria. The Plan Commission has the following options for a recommendation to City Council regarding planned case 2353 M18, a request by Sarah Birch, trustee, to rezone 9 parcels to B4 Central Business. 1, to forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to approve as requested, or 2, to forward the case to City Council with a recommendation to deny the request. Based on the evidence presented in this discussion, staff recommends the Plan Commission forward this case to City Council with a recommendation to approve the proposed rezoning. Mr. Paul Tapman is here to answer questions regarding the Birch application. Also, John Kaiser and David Crow are here for that application. Bridget Logue, owner of 406 South Lake Street, is also in attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Reggie. Any questions for Mr. Ackerson?
Yes, I'm thinking specifically about the email and the comment you made that B4 is actually more restrictive than B3 in some regards. Could you speak to that just a little bit more, especially in terms of how it might impact the park?
So the way that B4 is more restrictive in that is that, let me pull the numbers here that my colleagues so kindly put together for me. In the B3 district, there are 137 total possible uses in that menu. 114 of those are permitted by right. In the B4 district, there's only 129 possible uses, so only 8 things that you can do in the B3 that you can't do in the B4, and 100 of those are permitted. So its more restrictiveness comes from the fact that you can do a fewer total number of uses. Now, that's not to say that that's a 1-to-1 ratio, that everything that you can do in the B4 you can do in the B3 plus 8 more. There's probably some that you can't do in the B3 that you can do in the B4. You'd have to look at the whole table of uses and or do an analysis of the zoning description sheets.
Mr. Ackerson?
And my follow-up has to do with the, excuse me, I'm losing my throat here. The rail to trail, the tie-in with the rail to trail,
Yes.
how is that going to impact that, from your understanding?
I would not think that there would be any impact difference between the B3 and the B4 zoning districts, because that rail to trail could be done in either one of those zoning designations, and that would be a discussion between future owners and whichever agencies are developing that trail. So, I'll leave it at that.
Further, Ms. Billman?
Have the city traffic engineers weighed in on this?
A traffic impact analysis would be required of the developer when any proposed uses would be submitted. So that was discussed. I will mention that IDOT is doing safety and road improvements along University Avenue there. They are taking, one of the reasons for the rezoning request is that IDOT is taking additional right-of-way along University Avenue, so that takes an additional 4.5 feet out of ownership of those parcels, so it makes the properties a little more difficult to develop in the future. We all know how important a mere 4 or 5 feet can be sometimes.
Mr. Turner?
So is the main difference, a couple of questions. Is the main difference here that we're thinking about the setback?
Correct. Well,
The
there-
main motivation?
the main motivation, as stated in the application, is to bring the properties closer to their future land use designation of central business. The practical development benefits that come from the B4 zoning district are the elimination of yard setbacks, so you can develop closer to the property lines, but only to the extent as other city and safety regulations allow you to approach them. So there would still be our visibility triangle, especially there at Rayson University, would still come into play. That would keep structures, landscaping, and other things out of that corner development. It's, height requirements might push a building further back out. So that's just from a zoning standpoint, the yard setbacks are eliminated. There's also the elimination of minimum parking requirements. I will say that in some of the recent developments in the B4 where parking hasn't been required, say Broadway Food Hall, for example, the developer still ends up wanting to put in parking. So it becomes more of a market-driven thing than a city requirement. One of the other requirements is a potential change in stormwater management plan requirements, but there is a determination made by Public Works that there's sufficient sanitary sewer capacity and storm sewer capacity in that area for the slate of B4 uses that could come out of there.
One of the things you mentioned also, I believe, is that rezoning to B4 actually would put the lots in conformity,
Right.
take them out of non-conformance.
4 of the lots are smaller than what the B3 would normally allow if you were creating a new B3 lot. But since they're, super old lots, they were already created prior to the B3 zoning having the minimum 6,000 square foot. Some of them are like 3,800 square feet right now.
Now, I don't know enough about this, but can you redo the lots since they're contiguous? And
Some-
what's involved in that?
An owner could submit a minor or major development request to reconfigure those lots or combine those lots into a single lot, but that is not required to, say, do a large development that straddles property lines. We do something called a zoning lot, which is basically if you have a single use that is taking place across several parcels, we look at all of those parcels as a single zoning lot and calculate setbacks and open space and floor to area ratio from that larger lot.
Sure. And this might be a better question for the petitioners, but is there an immediate plan for the development of this parcel?
I would leave that up to the petitioners to answer.
Further questions for Mr. Ricci? Nope. Thank you. Once again, briefly, the rules for public hearing. The petitioner may address the commission and probably should, given there was a question. And then anyone in favor of the proposals may address the commission. Anyone opposed to the proposals may address the commissions. And then if desired, the petitioners can have the last say and rebut. And then we will close the public input portion and discuss and possibly vote. So I don't know if anybody from the petitioners wants to please come forward and kind of address Mr. Turner's question about any development plans. If you could just come up and sign the thing. I know it's kind of a formality, but if you don't have any, it'll be short testimony.
As he introduced earlier, my name is Paul Tapman.
Yeah.
I'm a local developer in the city of Urbana. I was a former partner with Mr. Birch before he deceased, not in this property, but other properties. So we've kind of we've been working this property for some time, trying to find a use for it. We've got a couple potentials. Do I have a dead set contract? No. We're very close, but we're not there yet. So
Yeah, but you definitely intend to redevelop it. You intend to redevelop it?
Yes.
Yes, great.
Can I ask a
Mr.
question?
Turner?
How would, in terms of thinking about the redevelopment, how would the change to B4 help the potentials that you have in line?
I'm sorry I didn't catch all that.
How would the change to B4 actually help with the redevelopment that you're thinking about right now?
One in particular that was looking at is the parking with the state redoing the University Avenue and then putting 10-foot sidewalks in there on that side of the street. They've taken more of this property, and with the B3, you already have a 17-foot setback plus the 10 for the sidewalk plus the distance to the curb, so you're losing about 30 foot of property, 35 foot of property. And then a parking spot is 22 foot, and a drive lane is another 22 foot, so it could easily be in the middle of the lot before we ever got started. So
Okay,
it's important to one of the users.
great, thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Tapman? Nope. Thank you very much, sir. Anything else you'd like to?
No, not
No?
at this time. Not
You're
at
good?
liberty to say.
All right. Anybody else in favor or the other petitioner wish to address? It's certainly not required. No?
On behalf of Ms. Lowe,
Yeah, if you could just state your name and sign the paper, thank you.
my name's David Crow, and I think everything that Mr. Tapman said applies to that adjacent single lot.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
Do you have a question, Mr. Asperson?
Yes, just because I noticed there was a comment in here about this property can't get to the road without going through another property, is that correct? So how does it function now? Is it like a driveway or something? I'm trying to remember
There's
this.
an easement, and it just cuts across the existing property, so that would have to be addressed as the parcels get
Right, but
developed.
but if I'm correct, the intent is to develop the whole area, right? And this is just one piece of the overall
Yes, sir.
plan. Okay.
Any further questions? Oh, thank you very much. Anybody else wish to address the commission in favor of the proposal? And if you could please state your name and sign the register.
You don't have to have known that I wanted to talk.
No.
I don't, okay.
No.
I've never.
We
been-
don't have like the city council where you put in the
Okay.
paper.
My name is Nyla Blair, and I actually live at 406 North Lake with two other people, one of them being Bridget. And I started living there, believe it or not, I started living there in 1985 and lived there for a handful of years, and then we've been friends forever. And what I see is actually both sides, because over the years, you know, when I was first there was a vet clinic there, there were just all these houses around, and the beautiful Leal Park. And then over the years, of course, progress and, you know, things change. And so you see more and more businesses moving in. And I am kind of for that too, because a lot of them are convenient to us. We recently had the, I don't know what they're called, they're like these places where you can go in and gamble,
Yeah.
right on the corner across the way. And, you know, to me, changing this for business or whatever they're wanting to do, both of those things, that corner, I think it's unfair to the owners that are still out there to put them in this position, because I don't know how many of you have been around that area, but to put them in the position of like, okay, there's this beautiful park, which it is a beautiful park, and they do have lovely trees, and we're all about nature too. But what I've seen happening is you're getting pushed and pushed, which to me is fine. You know, we kind of embrace that, like, okay, times are changing. I mean, it's the 21st century, and you know, that's an old neighborhood. But anyone, I'm a layperson, and I don't even know how to address a council meeting in a sense, you know, using all the right words
You're
for
doing fine.
zoning and all this and that. But common sense or whatever, I think, you know, I've lived there all this time. I've seen these houses. I've watched Bridget over the years thinking, oh gosh, what are they putting in now? And we were so excited, believe it or not, to find out they were maybe going to put in a Jiffy Lube, because that seemed pretty harmless, you know, and wouldn't possibly pull in people who were maybe not, you know, going to do the best things in the neighborhood, you know, as far as following laws and such. And so then all of a sudden, for whatever reasons, I have no idea, they don't allow Jiffy Lube to come in, is what I've heard, but then they let this place come in, you know, and it's like, okay, so I've told her, like, gosh, we used to look out her kitchen window or whatever. We couldn't even see Carl Park. It was wonderful. We had the park, I'm not Carl
Leo,
Park,
yeah,
Carl
yeah.
Hospital.
Oh.
We couldn't even see Carl Hospital. Not that I have anything against Carl Hospital, but now you look out, oh, you can see everything. And if you ever see her house on the corner, you know, there's houses back there, like people know now. This other idea of like, Leal Park's a beautiful park, and if you've never gone there and been there during the days or at night, you might be thinking, like I would be, like, oh gosh, a beautiful park, don't go letting them destroy that, you know, area and stuff. And then you live there, and then the reality comes. I'm not saying no one visits there that isn't, you know, having a wonderful time, but I've been living there since the 80s and visiting her regularly. I couldn't even tell you how few times I've seen anyone actually out there enjoying the park. Like what? Picnicking? No, never. Out there sitting there with their families, playing Frisbee or something? Never. So I'm thinking, how could I have missed all that the whole time I've been in that area? And so we just enjoy the park. Bridget's yard, she always has it. She likes gardening, so she always has it real nice. And we have a little fence, so you know, it's kind of like our own thing, and then you kind of stay out on the park. Okay, at night, what do we get to hear? People going through the park, our dogs start barking and stuff, because you hear these people, I guess fighting, walking through the park late at night, cursing, people yelling at each other, cursing and stuff, and it's like, so when you all think, or, you know, when the average person is thinking, oh, it's a beautiful park, let's not do anything, and you got the beautiful boneyard, which we do love, that, you know, beautification project, and Silver Creek's lovely and all this. But it's like, it's not what everyone thinks it is. When you live there, then you see it. And you see, I'm not going to say regularly, but often enough that I notice it. And I would say to Bridget, gosh, we're kind of being pushed out, you know, as homeowners, because it's taken a while, but people will then give up their houses and they'll move, and then they leave. Then someone else leaves. Bridget's home is like one of 4 homes left back there, and I think one of them is like a garage apartment. So if that constitutes an actual, you know, old house or something. And so it's like, particularly not to say anything against Birch Realty having their corner, because I would love everyone to get what they want today, but if you did that and then didn't do hers, that would just be like a double whammy, because it's like, you know, she's going to get nothing from that, except it is turning into a business thing, and a, you know, area, a business district. And it's like, unless someone can sit there and think, oh no, we're going to totally keep this residential, you know, you're going to have to build here with what's around there now, people are not going to come in, that I know of, and build brand new homes. Like the people who would have the money, build brand new homes on that little corner, and then they're just not going to, not with what's around there now. And you talk about the safety and stuff. Well, as it is now, what was it a few years ago? We live right there off the corner of Race and, you know, it's because we're right off the park. Our driveway ends on Race Street, right by the Windy City.
Right.
What, the guy goes home, he's just walking home from the wonderful Corn Festival, gets mowed down.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, the guy in the wheelchair is having to push his wheelchair backwards because he's unfortunately doesn't have the money or whatever to have a nice electric one, so he's pushing it backwards. He gets mowed down and killed. So it's like, it's not this picturesque thing that I could see someone thinking if they're not from the neighborhood and don't know the neighborhood, you know.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not some, I don't know. I'm just all for the change.
Okay.
Because of progress.
All right. Well, thank you. Do
Yeah.
you have any questions for Ms. Blair? No. Thank you very much for your
Thank you for
testimony.
your time.
Yeah. Anybody else wish to speak in favor of this? Does anybody wish to speak in opposition to this? Please.
Hi again.
Hi.
I'm still Gina Peluso, and
Yeah.
I still live right down the street. Again, I'm not so much opposed to this being a business area. I think I'm more opposed to the elimination of the setbacks. And if this does become one big lot, then we could end up with something like got built on University Ave on the Champaign side, where the building is literally right up to the sidewalk. So that's my one of my big concerns. My other big concern is the Urbana Park District. And what happens to Lake Street that runs along those properties? And, you know, there is a National Registered property on that park in the Greek Revival Cottage that was moved there in the 70s, I think. So I guess the properties have been zoned business B3 for quite some time. I just don't know, and I understand about the parking being the major thing for changing it to B4, But again, that also, changes the floor area ratio, the open space ratio, all the setbacks, they're all gone, pretty much. And then the other issue is that this whole corner used to be a cemetery. So, whoever is going to try to develop this in the future is going to have to go through a lot of architectural surveying to even get water, gas, sewage to these properties. I know that's not a problem for me or you, because you're the zoning commission and I don't own the properties, but it is a consideration. And I'd hate to see what, a shopping center with a 0 lot line right up against the park would look like someday. And, in all transparency, I used to live at 205 University, which was the house right on the corner, the one that just got demolished in the last year. So this property also has an emotional tie for me, but also, I go to that park still. I'm sorry that I've never been seen there, but I do go to that park, and we have had family gatherings, and we have had picnics, and, so I'd just like you to take into consideration what development right up to that lot line could look like in the future versus the B3 zoning that it is today. And I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Peluso? Nope. Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to address the commission? All right. Well, if nobody wishes to address this further, then I'll close the public input portion of this hearing, and we'll discuss the case and possibly vote. Thank you all for your testimony. Any discussion? Mr. Turner?
I guess as I'm thinking about this, I think about, I'm going to start sounding like a previous Plan Commission member here, but I kind of think that if we did have less parking and less setback, it would actually create more walkability. When it tried, more people would walk to places in a potential development here, which I think is something we want to actually promote, which would be kind of interesting.
That's one of the goals of that.
One of the
Correct.
goals, right?
Correct.
Right, exactly. So I think I have mixed feelings, again, because on one hand, I think, well, hey, it's been its own central business for a long time. Not a whole lot has been happening there. But I also think about the other side, Silver Creek and Boneyard, and it is beautiful. And walking from, Broadway Food Hall, kind of down by Silver Creek over to the new brewery that's over there. So there's some interesting potential happening. I think this would help facilitate that. So I'm in favor of the change.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Any further discussion? Mr. Ackerson?
I'm still trying to digest the concerns of the Park District listed. I would have really preferred to have had someone from there talking.
It would have been nice to.
Yeah, I found the person who actually lives in the area to have actually very powerful testimony. Because when I look at the parks, I'm thinking, when I'm concerned about interfering with wildlife and lights and that kind of stuff, I'm thinking about Crystal Lake Park, right across the street. Leal, I'm less familiar with. I've certainly driven by it, and most of us are very familiar with that area. I still am having a hard time trying to figure out what the negative impact is, because you can have nice parks in the middle of high-density business areas. In fact, I would argue we should have nice parks in the middle of high-density business areas. It's a good place for people to get out. I'm a huge advocate for green spaces. But the trail bothered me, but I don't know that I've heard anything telling me that they can't still do the rail to trail if we go through with the B4. So I'm leaning in the direction of being consistent with the future land use and going with central business. I do think this is an area of town that seriously needs redevelopment.
Thank you, Mr. Ackerson. Further discussion? For me, I think most of the Park District's concerns go to use rather than the sort of the differences between B3 and B4. The setbacks is, I get that. Especially, but if it's going to be any buffering, of the park, if they should want to expand all the way to the lot line on that side. So that's kind of one thing. But I think that still goes to site design rather than necessarily to zoning. And that those things can be negotiated, and I'm sure the developers would want to talk to the Park District and have a good neighbor. I don't see why they wouldn't. The other thing I think about this case is that, of course, everybody vote your conscience, but I think we just set a precedent in the case right before this, in which we have a situation where the plan calls for this to be central business. The proposal is to bring this into conformance with the plan. And so for me, that's controlling. I actually like this one as B4 better than the previous one as B4. But there's so I'm going to be consistent and stick with the plan. Anybody? Ms. Billman?
Yeah. One of my concerns has been traffic, because that's a tough turn there anyway. But I'm just going to have to trust the traffic engineers with that. And I think that the traffic there is going to limit the businesses that want to go in there anyway. I mean, I don't see it as being a high-traffic business going in there. I don't think that would work.
I don't.
And less parking would limit traffic.
Right. It could be a different kind of traffic. Hard to say. That's up for the developers. Ms.
My preference would be for a park.
Yeah, expand Leo Park. Yeah. Sure. Any further discussion? Any motions? Don't be shy. Ms. Billin?
Do we?
We're going to move them one at a time.
One
We're
at
going
a
to move
time.
them one at a time.
Okay. I move that we approve Plan Case 2353-M-18 to be forwarded to the City Council.
With a recommendation for approval.
With a recommendation for approval.
Motion by Ms. Billman.
I'll second.
Second, Mr. Turner. Any further discussion on this case? Then we can have a roll call when you're ready. I typed fast. Fast. No, you're doing fine. We got all the time you need.
Mr. Fitch.
Yes.
Ms. Wadrago.
Yes.
Mr. Turner.
Yes.
Ms. Yu.
Yes.
Mr. Ackerson.
Yes.
Ms. Billman.
Yes.
Motion passes. And now we have the other plan case. Want to move that one, Ms. Billman?
Yeah. I move that we forward Plan Case 2355-M-18 to the City Council with recommendation for approval.
Motion, Ms. Billman. Second, Mr. Turner.
Ms. Wadrago.
Yes.
Mr. Turner.
Yes.
Ms. Yu.
Yes.
Mr. Ackerson.
Yes.
Ms. Billman.
Yes.
And Mr. Fitch.
Yes. Motion is approved. And are we talking November 5th again on these? Yes? November 5th, City Council. Thank you very much for your testimony. Okay, we have no new business. Audience participation. Does anybody wish to address the Plan Commission on something that's not related to these cases but is related to planning? No? It's not always related to planning, so you have to say that. Staff report?
There is no staff report.
Staff report. Mr. Schneider.
I just have one item. I really want to thank you on behalf of the city for you that all come out here, giving up your time, and help us with this decision-making process. It's a very critical part of the process, and I think the citizens of Urbana appreciate it, and I know I do because people could be sitting at home or doing something different right now, but I think that's one of the wonderful things about people who want to remain involved in our governmental process, and I wanted to say on behalf of the city, I appreciate what you do.
Thank you.
I second
Thank you.
that, and thank you. Yeah. That's the staff report. We don't have a study session, therefore we're adjourned. I also want to thank city staff who stays past normal working hours. That's not lost on us either. Thank you.